Pay the hell up, Rodriguez, the bastard sneered. Fairchild, of course. His ice-chip eyes dared me to refuse. 10 grand to tickle the ivories? Pocket change to him. Ransom to me. Leo needed that RISD deposit. 3 weeks or his dream went belly up. One song, that's all. Easy money, right? Except my hands hadn't played a damn thing but dish soap and sorrow for 6 years. What they didn't know? I wasn't just playing notes. I was tuning a goddamn Molotov cocktail. They thought they were buying a performance. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. But Maya held a secret, a past locked away, with a key she'd long since thrown away. This is the story of one night, one party, and one man who tried to break an ordinary girl only to discover she was anything but. It's a story about how the most powerful song isn't played for applause, but for survival. The city of New York was a symphony, but Maya Rodriguez only ever heard the percussion, the clatter of plates in the industrial dishwasher at Aria, the relentless thud of her own tired feet on the pavement, the jackhammer of construction outside her cramped Queens apartment. These were the sounds of her life. The melodies were gone, buried under 6 years of grief and the crushing weight of responsibility. Aria, perched on the 60th floor of a midtown skyscraper, was a cathedral of modern gastronomy where the city's financial titans came to worship at the altar of their own success. Its panoramic windows offered a god's-eye view of the sprawling metropolis, a view that cost more per square foot than Mir's entire apartment. During her shifts, she moved through this world with a practiced invisibility. She was the differential smile, the swift hand that cleared a finished plate, the quiet voice that asked, still or sparkling. She was a function, not a person, and that was how she preferred it. Anonymity was a shield. Her life hadn't always been this way. There was a before, a time of light, warmth, and music. The before was a small, sun-drenched house in upstate New York, filled with the glorious sound of a 1928 Steinway Model M. Her father, a passionate high school music teacher, and her mother, a former concert violinist, had filled her world with harmony. For them, music was not a hobby, it was language. It was air. Maya had been their prodigy. Her small hands had first found the piano keys at the age of 4. By 10, she was mastering Chopin. By 16, she was a phenomenon, the youngest ever winner of the prestigious Van Cliern International Piano Competition's junior prize. A full scholarship to the Juilliard School was not just a dream, it was a foregone conclusion. Professors had flown in to hear her play, calling her a once-in-a-generation talent. Her future was a brilliant, blinding crescendo. Then came the silence. It arrived on a rainy Tuesday in October. A slick road, a logging truck that didn't see them, and a screech of tires that was the final discordant note in her parents' symphony. Maya, home with the flu, had been spared. Her younger brother Leo, then just 10 years old, had been at a friend's house. They were orphans in an instant. The music died that day. The light went out. The Steinway in the living room became a polished mahogany tombstone, and Maya couldn't bear to look at it, let alone touch it. The trauma had forged a steel wall between her and the keys, a psychological block so profound that the mere thought of playing caused a cold sweat to prickle her skin and her breath to catch in her throat. The inheritance was meager. After selling the house to pay off debts, Maya and Leo were left with just enough to start over in the city. At 18, she became Leo's legal guardian. Juilliard became an impossible fantasy. Survival became the only composition she had to master. Now at 24, she was a veteran of the service industry. Her hands, once celebrated for their grace and speed on ivory keys, were now calloused and occasionally nicked from kitchen knives. They were strong hands capable of carrying 4 plates at once, but they no longer knew the language of Rachmaninoff. Her entire world had shrunk to the 2-bedroom apartment she shared with Leo, and the relentless need to keep them afloat. Leo, now a lanky, fiercely talented 16-year-old, was her reason for everything. He was the quiet, observant one, but his soul was loud on canvas. He drew and painted with a startling ferocity, capturing the city's grit and beauty with charcoal and acrylics. He was her living legacy, the continuation of the artistry that had once defined their family. "Hey, May," Leo's voice pulled her from her thoughts. She was sitting at their small kitchen table, staring at a crumpled letter from the Rhode Island School of Design. Leo had been accepted into their pre-all summer program, a highly competitive course that was a direct pipeline into their undergraduate program. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. "Hey, kiddo," she said, forcing a smile as she folded the letter and tucked it away. He came over, peering at the stack of bills she was sorting. "Another one? Just the usual?" She lied, her stomach twisting. The Air Ed program came with a hefty price tag, a $10,000 deposit in tuition fee due in 3 weeks. It was a sum so laughably out of reach it felt like a cruel joke. Leo knew. He always knew. He put a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle. "We don't have to do it, you know. I don't know, get a job with you at Aria." A cold dread washed over Maya. The thought of Leo with his brilliant, vibrant spirit being ground down by the same life that was draining her was unbearable. The thought of his artistic hands stacking plates instead of holding a brush, it was a betrayal of their parents, of everything they had stood for. "Don't you dare say that," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "You are going. I'll figure it out. I always do." He looked at the large dust sheet-covered object that took up a ridiculous amount of space in their living room. It was the one thing Maya had refused to sell her parents' piano. They'd spent a fortune moving it from their old house. It was an albatross, a constant, silent reminder of the girl she used to be. Leo had never once heard her play it. "You could," he started, then stopped, knowing it was a forbidden topic. "Don't," she warned softly. "That's not an option." The next day at work, the tension was palpable. The entire restaurant had been booked for a private birthday party. The client was Atticus Fairchild, the 35-year-old heir to the Fairchild global logistics empire. He was a notorious figure in the city's social scene, impossibly wealthy, devastatingly handsome, and legendarily cruel. He was known for his ostentatious displays of power and his casual disdain for anyone he deemed beneath him, which was nearly everyone. Maria, the restaurant's manager, gathered the staff for a pre-shift briefing. Her face was tight with anxiety. "Listen up, everyone. Tonight is not a regular service. This is Atticus Fairchild. That means no mistakes, nothing out of place. He's known for complaining to get things comped, and he's also known for trying to get people fired for sport. Be professional. Be invisible. And whatever you do, do not engage with him unless he speaks to you first. Are we clear?" A nervous murmur of assent went through the staff. Maya felt a familiar knot of dread tighten in her stomach. It was just one night, 8 hours of smiling and nodding and pretending she didn't exist. She could do that. For Leo, she could do anything. She just had to get through the shift, collect her tips, and find a miracle worth 10,000 tuanlas. The party began precisely at 8 p.m. A river of wealth flowed into Aria, a parade of designer gowns, bespoke suits, and jewels that glittered with cold, hard light. The air thickened with expensive perfume and the low hum of self-congratulatory chatter. Maya, tray in hand, navigated the sea of bodies, her face set in a polite, neutral mask. She offered flutes of Dom Perignon and canapes of caviar on buckwheat blennis, her movements fluid and efficient. She saw him across the room. Atticus Fairchild stood at the center of it all, a shark in a perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit. He wasn't just in the room, he owned it. He had the easy arrogance of a man who had never been told no in his life. His laughter was a sharp, barking sound that cut through the noise, demanding attention. Beside him, clinging to his arm, was his fiancée, Beatrice Vanderbilt. Her name was as old and storied as his. She was beautiful in a severe, sculpted way, her blonde hair pulled back in a shiny so tight it seemed to pull at the corners of her eyes. She wore a silver dress that shimmered like a fish's scales. Her smile, however, didn't quite reach her eyes. There was a brittle quality to her, a carefully constructed poise that seemed one strong gust away from shattering. Maya's job was to keep the champagne flowing at the main table where Atticus held court. It required her to be close to hear snippets of their conversation. Flew the entire board to Monaco for the weekend. The deal was done before the jet fuel cooled. Atticus was boasting a smug grin on his face. "Only you, darling," a sycophantic friend cooped. As Maya leaned in to refill a glass, her eyes met Beatrix for a fleeting second. A flicker of something crossed Beatrice's face. Not recognition, not yet, but a faint, puzzled curiosity, as if Maya were a painting she'd seen once in a forgotten gallery. Maya quickly looked away, her heart starting to beat a little faster. She felt an irrational sense of danger, a primal instinct to retreat. She spent the next hour avoiding the main table, busying herself with clearing duties at the periphery of the room, but Maria, ever watchful, intercepted her. "Rodriguez, table 1 needs more champagne." Now, with a resigned sigh, Maya grabbed a fresh bottle and a polished cloth and made her way back into the lion's den. As she approached, Atticus was telling another story, his voice laced with casual cruelty. "So, I told the valet, if you can't tell the difference between a McLaren and a Ferrari, maybe you should stick to parking bicycles." The look on his face, priceless. His friends roared with laughter. Beatrice offered a tight practice smile. Maya moved to Atticus's side, murmuring, "Excuse me, sir," as she reached for his glass. It was then that Beatrice looked at her again properly this time. Her perfectly plucked eyebrows drew together. The polite mask of the party hostess fell away, replaced by genuine shock. Her blue eyes widened and her mouth opened slightly. "My God," she breathed, the sound barely audible over the den. Addis stopped mid-sentence. "What is it, darling?" Beatrix didn't answer him. Her eyes were locked on Maya. "I know you," she said, her voice a strange mix of disbelief and accusation. Maya froze the heavy champagne bottle, suddenly feeling like a lead weight in her hand. Her mind raced. You're Maya Rodriguez." Beatrice said the name coming out as a strange foreign thing in this opulent setting. The blood drained from Maya's face. Now she remembered. Beatrice Van Darbilt. She hadn't been a Van Darbilt then. She'd been Beatrix Vale. She had been in the Creole program at Juilliard with her. Beatrice had been a gifted pianist, technically proficient and fiercely ambitious. But she had always been second best. In every masterclass, every internal competition, Mia's raw, emotive talent had eclipsed Beatrix's rigid perfection. The memory of Beatrix's thin-lipped smile after Maya had won the concerto competition came flooding back, a smile of feigned congratulations that hit a core of bitter envy. "I am sorry, Mom. I think you're mistaken." Maya stammered, her training kicking in. Deny, deflect, disappear. Atticus looked from his stunned fiancée to the flustered waitress, with growing amusement. "You know her how deliciously common." "We were at Juilliard together," Beatrice said, still staring at Maya as if she were a ghost in the Creole division. She was the best one there, a prodigy." The last word was tinged with a complex blend of old resentment and current astonishment. Everyone said she was going to be the next Martha Argerich. A slow, predatory smile spread across Atticus Fairchild's face. His eyes, the color of chips of ice, lit up with a cruel sort of inspiration. He saw the situation not as a strange coincidence, but as a perfect opportunity for entertainment. The party was starting to lull. He needed a spectacle. "A prodigy," he drawled, his voice carrying across the table and silencing the nearby conversations. "Is that so? A piano prodigy serving me champagne." He let out a short, sharp laugh. "How the mighty have fallen." "What happened, Rodriguez? Did you run out of talent?" Maya felt the eyes of the entire table on her. Her face burned with humiliation. She wanted the floor to swallow her whole. My life changed," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Her parents died." Beatrice supplied a hint of something. Was it guilt in her tone? "It was a tragedy." Atticus waved a dismissive hand, uninterested in the dreary details of tragedy. "Well, what a coincidence," he said, gesturing toward the corner of the vast room. There, gleaming under a spotlight, sat a magnificent Fazioli F278 concert grand piano, its black lacquer finish shining like a pool of oil. It had been rented for the party, and a hired musician had been playing offensive jazz standards earlier in the evening before being dismissed. "We have a world-class piano and apparently a world-class pianist in our midst." Atticus announced, his voice booming with theatrical flair. He stood up, tapping a knife against his glass to get the attention of the entire room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out. The chatter died down as dozens of curious, wealthy faces turned towards him. We are in for a special treat tonight. It seems our lovely waitress, he gestured condescendingly at Maya, is none other than Maya Rodriguez, a former Juilliard prodigy. Let's have her play something for us." A confused, intrigued murmur rippled through the crowd. Maya's world tilted on its axis. This couldn't be happening. Her carefully constructed wall of anonymity was being torn down brick by painful brick in front of an audience of the city's most powerful people. Her boss, Maria, was watching from the sidelines, her face a pale mask of horror, trapped between defending her employee and appeasing a client who could ruin the restaurant with a single phone call. "No," Maya said the word small but firm. "I can't." "Oh, don't be shy," Atticus sneered. "A little Chopin, perhaps. A little something to earn your tip." He was enjoying this. The power, the public humiliation. It was a drug to him. He was turning her personal tragedy into a party trick. The silence in the room stretched thick and suffocating. Every eye was on her, waiting. The world had shrunk to the space between her and Atticus Fairchild. The opulent room, the curious faces, the panoramic view of the city, it all faded into a blurry periphery. All Maya could see were Atticus's mocking eyes and the smug, triumphant curl of his lip. All she could feel was the thundering of her own heart, a frantic, panicked drum beat against her ribs. "No!" she repeated, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "I'm working. I can't." Atticus chuckled, a low, patronizing sound. "Oh, I think your manager will forgive you." "Maria," he called out, not even bothering to look for her. "Your girl here is going to provide some entertainment. You can spare her for a few minutes, can't you?" Maria appeared at Maya's elbow, her face ashen. She gave Maya a desperate, pleading look. "Mr. Fairchild," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "It's not a request," Atticus said, his tone dropping its playful edge and hardening into cold steel. It was the voice of a man used to absolute obedience. "She will play." The steel in his voice shot straight into Maya's spine. A flicker of her old pride, the pride of the girl who could command a concert hall, sparked in the face of his tyranny. "I don't play anymore," she said, her chin lifting slightly. Atticus's eyes narrowed. He was not accustomed to defiance, especially from someone he considered to be less than nothing. The public nature of her refusal was a direct challenge to his authority, and he couldn't stand it. He decided to change tactics to make it transactional, to cheapen her refusal and turn it into a matter of price. "Is that it?" he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Are you holding out for payment? Fine." He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a thick, monogrammed leather wallet. He extracted a stack of $100 bills held together by a gold money clip. He peeled off 10 of them. $1,000, he said, fanning the bills out. "Play one song and it's yours." "That's probably more than you make in a week, isn't it?" The casual cruelty of the gesture, the way he equated her deepest trauma with a cash transaction, sent a wave of nausea through her. The faces in the crowd were a mixture of pity, discomfort, and morbid curiosity. They were watching a public execution of her dignity. Beatrice looked down at her plate, unable to meet Maya's eyes. A single spot of color burned high on each of her cheeks. "No, thank you," Maya said, her voice tight. The $1,000 was a lot of money. It would cover their rent for a month, but it wouldn't buy her soul. Atticus's smirk widened. He enjoyed the game. "Not enough. You drive a hard bargain, Rodriguez. A real businesswoman." He peeled off more bills, his movements slow and deliberate, designed for maximum humiliation. "Let's make it $5,000 for 5 minutes of your time." $5,000? The number hung in the air. That was half of what she needed for Leo, halfway to his dream. Her resolve wavered for a microcon. She saw Leo's face in her mind, his hopeful eyes when he looked at the Risey letter. "I'll figure it out," she had told him. Was this it? Was this the universe offering a deal with the devil? She looked at the money in his hand, then at his face. The sneer was still there. This wasn't an offer. It was a leash. He wanted to own her talent, to own her past, and parade it around for his own amusement. He wanted to prove that everyone, even a prodigy, had a price. "My answer is no," she said, her voice shaking but clear. Atticus let out an exasperated sigh, as if dealing with a petulant child. He looked around at his guests, a silent appeal for them to witness this absurdity. Then his eyes landed on Beatrice, who was now staring at Mia with a complicated expression. An idea sparked in his mind. "Tell me, Bay," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "This tragedy, the parents, was there anyone else? A sibling, perhaps?" Beatrice polled. "Atticus, don't." "She has a younger brother," Beatrice admitted quietly, her voice barely a whisper. Leo, Atticus's predatory smile returned wider and more menacing than before. He had found her weakness. "A brother, wonderful, and I'm sure he has needs. Schools to attend, things that cost money, things that a waitress's salary can't quite cover." Maya felt like he had reached into her chest and squeezed her heart. He knew nothing about Leo, but he understood the universal livers of desperation. He tossed the $5,000 onto the table where it landed, with a soft, obscene rustle next to a half-eaten lobster tail. Then he pulled out the entire stack of bills from his wallet. He didn't count them this time. $10,000, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush that was somehow more commanding than a shout. "Right here in cash, all of it yours. Just play one piece, anything you like. Think about it, Maya. $10,000. What could that do for your brother? What kind of future could that buy him?" $10,000, the exact amount, the precise number that had been haunting her waking thoughts and her dreams. It was the key to Leo's future, sitting there on a table offered by a man who despised her. It was a golden apple laced with the most potent poison. The room was utterly silent. Everyone understood the stakes now. This was no longer a party game. It was a brutal moral calculus, her pride versus her brother's dream, her integrity versus his opportunity. She looked at the money. She saw the raised acceptance letter. She saw Leo's sketches pinned all over his bedroom wall, vibrant alive, full of a promise that she was failing to nurture. She remembered his face when he'd offered to quit to join her in the gray, soul-crushing world of service. The thought was a physical pain. She could feel the weight of every stare, the judgment, the pity. She could feel Atticus's victory before it even happened. He was boxing her in, using her love for her brother as a weapon against her. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides began to tremble. Her breath hitched. A single hot tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Slowly, deliberately, she unclenched her fists. She looked at Maria, who gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, absolving her. She looked at Beatrice, who finally met her gaze, her eyes swimming with a mixture of horror and shame. Beatrice had started this, perhaps not intending this level of cruelty, but she had unleashed the monster and now couldn't stop it. Finally, Maya looked at Atticus Fairchild. There was no fear in her eyes anymore. There was no pleading. There was just a vast, cold emptiness that was slowly catching fire. "Fine," she said, her voice a dead, hollow thing. "I'll play." A wave of relief and renewed excitement went through the crowd. Atticus beamed triumphant. He had won. He had proven his point. Everything and everyone had a price. "Excellent," he boomed. "To the piano, then let's hear what $10,000 sounds like." Maya didn't look at the money on the table. She turned her back on it, on him, on all of them, and began the long, lonely walk towards the gleaming Fioli grand piano in the corner of the room. Each step was a lifetime. She was walking past the ghost of her 16-year-old self, past the wreckage of the car accident, past 6 years of silence and grief. She was walking into the heart of her greatest fear. Not for money, not for them, but for Leo. And as she walked, something inside her began to shift. The humiliation, the shame, the grief, it all began to turn to heat, to transform into something else entirely. It was becoming fuel. The walk to the piano felt like 100 miles. The plush carpet muffled her footsteps, but in her ears the silence of the room was a deafening roar. She was acutely aware of every set of eyes on her back. Every whisper she couldn't quite hear. They were expecting a spectacle. A clumsy, out-of-practice waitress fumbling through a simple tune. A pathetic performance to justify their host's cruel wager. They expected her to fail. Atticus Fairchild was counting on it. She reached the Fazioli. It was a breathtaking instrument, a peerless piece of Italian craftsmanship. Its polished black surface reflected the glittering chandeliers and the smug faces of the audience like a dark, distorted mirror. It was more than a piano. It was an indictment of her current life, a monument to the world she had lost. She pulled out the piano bench, the simple motion feeling alien and strange. She sat adjusting her position out of muscle memory that had lain dormant for years. Her waitress apron felt absurd, a coarse, utilitarian garment in the presence of such artistry. She smoothed it over her black trousers, her hands shaking so badly she had to clench them in her lap. A few titters rippled through the crowd. Atticus, standing near the front with his arms crossed, wore a smirk of pure satisfaction. "Any decade now, Rodriguez," he called out. Maya closed her eyes. The noise of the room faded away. The faces, the judgment, the 10,000 toddlers. It all receded. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw it all. The flashing lights of the police car, the sterile white walls of the hospital waiting room, the suffocating scent of funeralese, the dust sheet she'd thrown over the Steinway, a final act of surrender. The grief was a physical thing, a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She placed her trembling fingers on the keys. They were cool and smooth like polished bone. For a moment, her mind was a complete blank. 6 years of silence had built a fortress around her talent. She couldn't remember a single note. The panic rose in her throat, thick and choking. This was it, the ultimate humiliation. Atticus would win. And then she thought of Leo. She saw his face not full of pity, but full of fierce, unwavering belief. She saw him at his drawing table, his brow furrowed in concentration, his hand moving with a certainty she hadn't felt in years. She thought of his offer to sacrifice his own dream for her. The love she felt for him was a powerful surging force, a tide that crashed against the fortress of her trauma. She took a deep, shuddering breath, and then another. She didn't try to remember a piece. She didn't try to perform. She just let her fingers rest on the keys. And for the first time in 6 years, she listened. Not to the room, not to her fear, but to the silence inside her. And in that silence, a melody began to stir. She didn't start with something soft or simple. She didn't play the part of the broken girl. The fuel of her humiliation had ignited. The cold stone of grief in her chest was now a white-hot coal. Her fingers, no longer trembling, came down on the keys with a shocking, explosive force. It was the opening chord of Chopin's Etude in C minor opus 10, numbers 12. The revolutionary Etude. The sound that erupted from the Fazioli was not music. It was a thunderclap. It was a declaration of war. A torrent of furious cascading notes from her left hand filled the room. A sound of pure, unadulterated rage. The cocktail chatter ceased instantly. A champagne flute slipped from a guest's hand and shattered on the floor. The sound completely swallowed by the tempest pouring from the piano. Atticus Fairchild's smirk vanished, wiped clean from his face, as if by a physical blow. His jaw went slack. This was not the fumbling waitress he had expected. This was a force of nature. Maya's body was no longer her own. It was a conduit for 6 years of pent-up rage, sorrow, and love. Her posture, once slumped in defeat, was now erect and powerful. Her head was thrown back, her eyes still closed, but her face was a mask of fierce concentration. Her hands, the calloused, work-worn hands of a waitress, flew across the keyboard with a speed and precision that defied belief. The right hand joined in singing a passionate, desperate melody over the storm of the left. The music told her story. It was the frantic chaos of the accident, the dark despair of the aftermath, the grinding toil of her daily life, the fierce, protective love for her brother. Every note was infused with a raw, visceral emotion that technical perfection alone could never achieve. Beatrice Vale, for all her Juilliard training, could never have played like this. This wasn't just a performance. It was an exorcism. The guests were frozen, transfixed. The cynical, jaded faces of Manhattan's 1% were stripped bare, replaced by expressions of raw, unadulterated awe. They were no longer watching a waitress. They were witnessing an artist in the throes of creation, bearing her soul for them to see. Across the room, an older man with a shock of white hair and kind, intelligent eyes stood up from his table. His name was Professor Anton Petro, a legendary figure from Juilliard, now a guest conductor for the New York Philharmonic. He had been invited as a favor to the host's father, and he had been dreading the vapid evening. He had watched the cruel spectacle unfold with quiet disgust. When Maya had walked to the piano, he had recognized her instantly, his heart aching for the brilliant student who had simply vanished all those years ago. He had expected to hear something broken. But this was not broken. This was devastating. It was the playing of a master forged in the fires of immense suffering. Tears welled in his eyes as he listened not just to the notes, but to the story they told. The piece reached its climax, a furious, defiant cry of chords that seemed to shake the very glass of the skyscraper's windows. Then, with a final crashing cascade of notes that resolved into a single powerful C minor chord, it was over. The final note hung in the air, vibrating with emotion. The silence that followed was absolute. It was profound, heavy, sacred. No one moved. No one breathed. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the distant wail of a siren from the streets 60 floors below. Maya's hands fell from the keyboard into her lap. She opened her eyes, her chest heaving, sweat beading on her forehead. She was back in the room, the spell broken. She looked out at the sea of stunned faces, her vision blurry with unshed tears. Then one person began to clap. It was Professor Petro. His applause was slow, deliberate, and loud in the silent room. Then another person joined in, and another. And then the entire room erupted. It wasn't polite pre-unctor applause, it was a roar. It was a standing ovation. It was a thunderous, heartfelt acknowledgement of the staggering talent they had just witnessed. People were on their feet, their faces alight with an emotion none of them had expected to feel tonight. Genuine wonder. Maya stared at her hands, the hands that had just created that storm. They were her hands again. The wall was gone. The fortress had been leveled. She was free. The applause crashed over Maya in waves, a sound she hadn't heard directed at her in years. It was overwhelming, disorienting. She felt exposed, as if she had stripped naked in the middle of the room. She started to stand, her only instinct to flee, to escape back into the shadows of the kitchen. But before she could move, Professor Petro was pushing his way through the crowd. He bypassed Atticus Fairchild without a glance and came to stand before the piano, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Maya," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He reached out and took her hands, turning them over and looking at the calluses with a tender reverence. "My God, Maya Rodriguez." The use of her full name, spoken with such respect by a man of his stature, sent a murmur through the room. People who hadn't known her name were now repeating it in whispers. Maya Rodriguez, Professor Petro. She breathed shock to see her old mentor. He ignored the stunned audience. "That was not just a performance," he said, his voice ringing with authority. "That was a testament. What you have, it's more than talent. It has deepened. It has been tempered by life. It is profound." He then turned to face the captivated crowd. "For those of you who do not know," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of a pronouncement, "this young woman, Maya Rodriguez, was the most singularly gifted pianist I have ever had the privilege to teach at the Juilliard School. She won the Van Cliburn Junior competition at 16. She was destined for the world's greatest stages before tragedy forced her to walk a different path." He looked directly at Atticus Fairchild, and his kind eyes turned to ice, a path that some, it seems, would mistake for a circus, for their own callous amusement. The rebuke was sharp, public, and utterly damning. Atticus's face, which had been pale with shock, now flushed a deep mottled red. He was no longer the ringmaster, he was the fool. In a room where reputation was currency, Professor Petrov had just bankrupted him. All his wealth, all his power could not undo the fact that he had been exposed as a classless, cruel bully in front of his peers, his fiancée, and one of the city's most respected cultural figures. The crowd's energy shifted palpably. The awe for Mayer curdled into contempt for Atticus. They had witnessed something beautiful and true, and his attempt to defile it now seemed grotesque. It was Beatrice who made the final move. The brittle poise she had maintained all evening finally shattered. She walked over to the table, her movements stiff, She picked up the wad of $10,000. For a moment, Maya thought she might offer it to her, a pathetic apology. Instead, Beatrice walked over to Atticus, her blue eyes blazing with a fire he had probably never seen. "You are a small, pathetic man," she said, her voice low, but carrying in the charged silence. And then, with a flick of her wrist, she threw the entire stack of bills in his face. The $100 bills fluttered down around him like grotesque confetti landing on his pristine suit and the expensive carpet at his feet. A collective gasp went through the room. "We're done," Beatrice said, her voice clear and final. She turned, gave Maya one long, unreadable look, a look that held a universe of regret, envy, and a flicker of newfound respect. And then she walked away, head held high, right out of the party and out of Atticus Fairchild's life. The humiliation was now complete. Atticus stood alone, bills scattered around his feet, his fiancée gone, his guests staring at him with open disdain. He had tried to embarrass a waitress and had ended up destroying his own engagement and social standing in a single catastrophic miscalculation. Empowered by Petro's validation and Beatrice's defiance, Maya felt the last of her fear fall away. She stood up from the piano bench, her spine straight. She walked not towards the exit, but back towards the table where this all began. She stopped in front of a speechless Atticus Fairchild. She looked at the money on the floor, then back at his face. "My music is not for sale," she said, her voice quiet, but ringing with the force of the final chord she had played. "And it is certainly not for your amusement." She didn't wait for a response. She turned her back on him on the wreckage of his party and walked towards the staff exit, leaving behind the sound of her own name being spoken with wonder and the sight of a millionaire utterly and completely diminished. As she pushed through the door into the blessed anonymity of the service corridor, she felt not shame, but a profound and liberating sense of peace. She hadn't earned $10,000. She had earned something far more valuable herself. The sterile, fluorescent-lit service corridor felt like a decompression chamber. Maya leaned against the cool metal of the kitchen door, the adrenaline from her performance draining away, leaving a profound humming exhaustion in its wake. The distant roar of applause was still a faint echo in her ears, a surreal soundtrack to her escape. She had walked through fire and had not been burned. She had been reforged. The journey home was a blur. Descending from the glittering heights of Aria to the rumbling depths of the subway felt like returning to Earth from another planet. The city's usual cacophony, the screech of train wheels, the murmur of late-night commuters, the distant wail of a siren sounded different tonight. It was no longer a relentless assault of noise. For the first time in 6 years, she could hear the spaces between the sounds, the quiet rhythms and unintended harmonies. It was as if her performance had retuned not just her own soul, but the world around her. She walked into the apartment she shared with Leo, who was already asleep. The living room was dark, save for the sliver of moonlight illuminating the hulking dust sheet-covered shape of the piano, the silent monument to her past. She looked at it not with the usual pang of dread, but with a newfound neutrality, a sense of an old truce finally being signed. She didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window watching the lights of Queens flicker and fade, feeling the tectonic plates of her life shifting beneath her. The next morning, she woke with a clarity she hadn't known since she was a teenager. The gray, oppressive weight that had settled on her heart after her parents' death had lifted, replaced by a quiet, steady strength. She made coffee, her movements deliberate. There was no hesitation. She knew what she had to do. Instead of putting on her black and white waitress uniform, she chose a simple pair of jeans and a clean blue blouse. She walked into Aria at 10 a.m., long before the lunch service began. The dining room was empty, the chairs stacked on tables, the morning sun streaming through the panoramic windows and illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Maria, her manager, was in her office, nursing a cup of coffee and looking utterly spent. She looked up as Maya appeared in the doorway, and her face was a mixture of awe and apprehension. "Rodriguez," she said, her voice quiet. "I thought you might not come in." "I came to quit, Maria," Maya said, her tone gentle but firm. There was no anger, no resentment. "I can't work here anymore." Maria nodded slowly, a deep sigh escaping her. I don't blame you. What he did, what I let him do. It was unforgivable. I was a coward. I was so afraid of losing the restaurant's biggest account that I was willing to sacrifice you. Her eyes were filled with genuine shame. I'm sorry, Maya. You were in an impossible position, Maya said, offering a grace Maria didn't expect. But I can't be invisible anymore. I don't think I know how. No, Maria agreed, a small, sad smile touching her lips. I don't think you do. She stood and extended a hand. For what it's worth, what you did last night, it was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. You took his ugly little game and you turned it into something beautiful. You gave everyone in that room a story they will be telling for the rest of their lives. And she was right. The story of the Aria Pius spread through the city's arteries like wildfire. It was too delicious, too mythic to remain a secret. It became the ultimate tale of hubris and talent. A modern-day David and Goliath played out on a Fatioli Grand. Atticus Fairchild's name became synonymous with public humiliation. Columns in the New York Post's page 6 hinted at a tech heir's catastrophic party foul that led to a very public, very expensive dumping. He was uninvited from a charity board. A major merger his company was negotiating suddenly stalled the other party, citing vague concerns about erratic leadership. In a world built on image and reputation, he had authored his own social and professional obituary. He had tried to expose Mayer as having a price and had ended up proving he had no value. 2 days after Mayer quit, her phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. Is this Maya Rodriguez? A man's voice asked, warm and accented with the gentle cadence of Eastern Europe. Yes, she said, her heart giving a small flutter. Maya, this is Anton Petro, her breath caught. Professor Petro, she said, sinking onto the edge of her sofa. I don't know how to thank you for what you said, for standing up for me. Nonsense, he said warmly. I did nothing. Your music did all the talking. I have not stopped thinking about it since that night. The passion, the power, it was magnificent. But there was pain in it too, a deep well of it. I am only sorry you had to go through such an ordeal to find your way back to the Keys. I think maybe it was the only way, she confessed, the realization dawning on her as she said it. Maybe I had to break completely before I could heal. Perhaps, he mused, but the healing should not end there. It must be nurtured, which brings me to the reason for my call. He paused and Maya could hear the smile in his voice. I am the head of the piano department at Juilliard now. It seems I've accumulated some authority in my old age. We have a position opening for a graduate teaching assistant next semester. It comes with a full scholarship for a master's degree in performance. It would involve mentoring young undergraduate students, people just like you were, and continuing your own studies. The position is yours, Maya. No audition necessary. Your performance the other night was all the audition I will ever need. The word struck her with the force of a physical blow. A master's degree, teaching, a full scholarship. It was a fantasy, a dream she hadn't even allowed herself to have for 6 years. It was the entire world she had lost being handed back to her whole and beautiful. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and silent. Professor, I don't know what to say. She stammered, her voice thick with emotion. Say you'll think about it, he said kindly, but don't think for too long. Talent like yours belongs in the light. She hung up the phone, her mind reeling. Hope so fierce and bright it was almost painful bloomed in her chest, but a shadow lingered at its edge. Lo! The Juilliard position was a miracle, but it wouldn't start for months. The risk deposit of $10,000 was due in 2 weeks. The familiar crushing weight of that number settled on her once more. The next afternoon, the shadow was banished for good. A sleek courier service delivered a thick cream-colored envelope. It bore no return address, only her name typed in elegant font. Puzzled, she carefully opened it. Inside was a letter from a white shoe law firm on Park Avenue and a cashier's check. Her eyes scanned the letter, her heart beginning to pound. Ms. Rodriguez, this letter is to inform you that an educational trust has been established in the name of your brother Leo Rodriguez. The trust has been created by a benefactor who was present at the private event at Aria on the evening of July 28th. This individual, who wishes to remain strictly anonymous, was profoundly moved by your artistic integrity and personal strength. Believing that such artistry deserves to be fostered in all its forms, our client has endowed this trust to cover the full 4-year tuition room and board for Leo Rodriguez at the Rhode Island School of Design, contingent on his acceptance into their undergraduate program. Enclosed, please find a cashier's check for $10,000 loss made out to RISD to cover the deposit for the pre-all summer program. Our firm will handle all future payments directly with the institution. We wish you and your brother the very best. Maya stared at the letter, then at the check in her trembling hand. $10,000. It was the money, the ransom for her dignity, the price of her humiliation, and now it had come back to her not as a weapon, but as a gift, an act of pure anonymous grace. She sank into a chair, the letter and check clutched to her chest, and she laughed. It was a bubbling, incredulous, joyous sound. When Leo came home from school, he found her sitting in the living room, a strange, luminous calm about her. He saw the official-looking envelope and the check on the table and looked at her confused. "What's all this?" She didn't speak. She just pushed the documents towards him. He picked up the letter, his brow furrowed in concentration as he read. His eyes widened. He reread it as if he couldn't believe the words. He looked at the check, his jaw slack. "Maya, what? How is this possible?" he whispered, his voice filled with awe. She smiled, a brilliant, genuine smile that seemed to light up the entire room. "I told you I'd figure it out." She stood and walked over to the piano. With a single fluid motion, she took a corner of the dust sheet and pulled. It slid off the Steinway and billowed to the floor, releasing the faint nostalgic scent of lemon oil and old wood. The piano gleamed in the afternoon light, its 88 keys like a patient, waiting smile. She sat down on the bench. Her posture was perfect. Her hands, no longer trembling, hovered over the keys. She looked at Leo, whose face was a canvas of shock and dawning joy. Then she began to play. It wasn't a furious revolutionary storm this time. It was the soft, shimmering opening notes of debut's Clair de Lune. The melody, as gentle and hopeful as moonlight breaking through clouds, filled their small apartment. It was a lullaby for their grief, a hymn to their resilience. It was the music of her childhood, the love of her parents, a promise of peace. Leo stood frozen for a moment, listening, truly seeing his sister for the first time, not as the tired guardian or the invisible waitress, but as the powerful, breathtaking artist she was. He quietly walked to his room and returned with his charcoal pencils and a large sketchbook. He sat on the floor, and as the beautiful healing notes washed over him, he began to draw. With swift, certain strokes, he captured the light from the window hitting her hair, the graceful curve of her back, the focused passion on her face. The symphony of their lives had begun anew. It was no longer a solo of survival. It was a duet played on piano and canvas, a testament to the unbreakable bond they shared, and a powerful reminder that even after the longest, darkest silence, music in all its forms will always find a way to return. That single-nighted aria wasn't just about a shocking performance, it was about the reclamation of a soul. Maya's story is a powerful reminder that our true value is never determined by our job title, our bank account, or the judgment of others. It resides in our spirit, our integrity, and the hidden talents we carry within us. It shows us that a moment of profound humiliation can be transformed into a moment of ultimate triumph, and that the most powerful voice we have is our own. Whether it's spoken or played on the keys of a piano, we all have a piano in our lives, a passion we've silenced, a dream we've set aside. What's yours? If this story of resilience and redemption moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that inspire and empower. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. And please share your own stories of hidden talents in the comments below. We'd love to read them. Thank you for watching.